Oh, it's Friday. We made it to the weekend.
Friday afternoon, I know. And John, it's really weird. It's almost like we didn't have a spring at all. It's hot already. And I was running yesterday, and I'm like, it's not March. I was running. I did a little lunchtime run, and I was like starting to like not be very comfortable. As it was getting at 85 degrees at lunchtime.
Yeah. Well, and my car was saying 100 degrees the other day. I got to believe
Yeah,
that's just, reflecting off the pavement. But, to go from mild temperatures or winter to what we're having now, that's a big shift. And
it's a big shift.
you do need to, I, you know, got to get used to
Yeah,
this new temperature because
yeah,
our spring was what, a week long. So,
exactly. No, I purposely ran outside this week at lunchtime,
yeah.
both times, just short runs.
Hmm.
One was like 30 minutes, one was 40 minutes, just because I want to acclimatize. Like it's if this is the new norm of what it's going to be this year, the sooner I can get used to it and acclimatize, the better.
No, for sure. Well, and that brings us to the topic that you
Yeah.
came up with today, talking about environmental stuff.
Yeah. So we want to talk about racing in the wind and some strategies around it, some thought processes around it. And this came up because last week in the Dallas race, I had some athletes racing there, and it was exceptionally windy. The pictures were unbelievable.
Yeah,
At least the pictures I saw looked like 2, 3 foot white caps on the
yeah,
lake,
yeah.
and then talking to the athletes afterwards of like how difficult it really was,
Hmm.
and thinking about once again like what can you do to prepare yourself for those things, and then ultimately what are some strategies to use while racing. So John, we live in a pretty windy spot,
We do.
right? So have you ever had to race in a really windy race?
Um, would I prefer a really windy race? Well, it does depend on the type of wind. I know
Yeah,
that sounds odd, but if it's either a headwind or tailwind, that's one thing. The crosswinds is another thing. And so, like where we bike down at Lake Mead, you can get these areas where it may be a headwind all of a sudden. Well, it would be a headwind, but then all of a sudden you go down in between this little valley, and you get this crosswind that
yeah,
comes across. St. George is known for that. When we've done Ironman in 70.3 there, and that unpredictability of the wind is what I don't like racing in.
yeah. And and honestly, even if you think it's predictable, it's still not really, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it's wind.
you know,
Yeah.
and it doesn't happen often in racing, but also when a car goes by you,
Hmm.
if you especially got a little bit of a headwind or a little cross headwind or cross tailwind, that can really affect you as well. And I know that not all courses are closed completely to traffic.
Right.
I've done some races where you basically just one lane was closed and cars were going past you, and there's a crosswind, and it's a real thing that you have to deal with.
Hmm.
Not in every race, but in some of the races. So the first thing I guess I want to talk about is, the propensity of people these days potentially to be training indoors on windy
Yeah.
days. And I gotta be honest with you, John. I've been guilty of it,
Hmm.
right? Oh, it's a super windy day. I'll just train inside,
Yeah.
especially if it's cold, right? Cold and windy. So I think that that's something that we need to really think about. Is you number one is you can never tell months in advance when you sign up for these races, is it going to be windy or not?
No.
And so ultimately, maybe making a conscious decision sometimes to actually train outside in the wind.
Hmm.
Do you think like that?
I do, but I am like you, also guilty of, well, I'll just jump on the trainer because you don't have to prepare any clothing. It's nothing that you got to do. It's just jump on the trainer and go. But it is so yeah, you do. And fortunately, the trainers that we have today are better than trainers 10 years ago, 15 years ago,
Yep.
what have you. And so there is a good ability to get a good training session indoors. But biking outdoors in different environmental conditions, it increases your ability to handle your bike and to deal not only physiologically with the different conditions, but mentally too.
No. I'm going to tell you some really, I don't know if this is irony or how you describe this, but this seems like irony to me is it'll be windy out. I'll say, I'm going to ride on the trainer and then I put two fans on myself,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
I literally add wind
Right, right.
to avoid wind.
Yeah. That's good.
It actually is, I think it's hilarious because, obviously it's completely different when you're not moving,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but
Yeah, no, so yeah, mechanically it's a little different, but I think that the irony is good. But you asked me about racing in wind. Do you
yeah.
prefer that, or do you prefer minimal wind?
Do you know, like, I'm probably like everybody else. I would prefer a day of no wind, 60 degrees, maybe 65 degrees, medium level humidity,
Yeah,
and maybe like a light cloud cover,
yeah, yeah,
right? But the reality is, I always seem to do better compared to other people when the conditions are worse.
hmm
And I don't know if it's because I've raced a lot and I have a lot more, I mean, I have a lot of wisdom, or I don't seem to like, I never let the conditions bother me. I truly try hard not to. Um, because I also believe that everyone's racing the same race
yeah,
course, right? And so once again, yeah, I wouldn't obviously never prefer to race in bad
yeah,
conditions, but
yeah,
I'm okay with it.
yeah.
So I'm thinking back to, do you remember the 70.3 Worlds a few years ago when we had the torrential windstorm? And it was wind and hail and rain
Oh,
in,
St.
in
George?
St. George.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, totally.
And
Where were you? Was the little question when the storm came through.
yeah, exactly. And I can still remember where I was when the really thick of it came through, and many people pulled over to the side of the road.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that's fine for them, but I'm not, because
hmm
actually I ride in a lot of wind. I'm okay
Yeah.
with this. Now, did I sit up a little bit more? Sure. Was I going a little bit more conservative on the downhills? Yes, but I wasn't stopping,
hmm
right? And maybe that's this, maybe I should have, but I mean, I don't, I was kind of scared at some points. I'm not gonna lie to you, but I also think that once again, if you practice outside and you have the skill, you
hmm
can do it. Like
Yeah.
you absolutely can do it.
So maybe let's tackle this a little bit more. Where what tips do you have for biking in a headwind or a tailwind, and then we'll do the
Yeah.
crosswind.
So this is actually really, really important, and it's something that I talk to the athletes that I coach all the time. Um, Even athletes racing this weekend, we've had this conversation because the races this weekend are, Oceanside and Galveston. It's going to be windy in both.
hmm
Is when you're in a tailwind, there's not much penalty for sitting up a little bit,
Right.
right? And so I look at the tailwind sections as that's your time to eat and drink as much as you can basically get down, right? And don't be so worried about holding a perfect position the entire time.
hmm
But when you turn into the headwind, if it's a headwind, you need to be as tiny as possible.
hmm
And when you do eat or drink, it needs to be very, very strategic. So what I mean by that is maybe you do that on an uphill. So then at least it's not being penalized as much.
Right.
And then I kind of just say, hey, listen, like when you're there into a headwind, I want you to just think about being as tiny as possible.
hmm
Like you're like an arrow going through the wind.
Yeah.
And every time you pop your head up, every time once again you reach for something in a pocket, you're gonna be penalized.
hmm
And I also tell them it's better to, especially into a headwind, to push less power but stay arrow.
hmm
And so those are kind of my big takeaways for headwinds and tailwinds. How about you?
Yeah, I like that a lot, and I agree 100% with all those. And the one that I would add is there's a mental component to dealing with, especially a head.
Yep.
And if let's go, you're racing and you got a tailwind, then it's not back, you turn around, you come back in the headwind. You're racing and you're going 28 miles per hour, whatever it is, you're just flying and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm crushing it, I'm crushing it. You have to mentally prepare yourself for the headwind and the slower speed. I know that sounds odd, but a lot of times it's hard to even know if you're in a tailwind.
Yeah. You
And
don't even notice it.
I always tell people if it's quiet, you're in a tailwind,
Yeah. If you look down at your bike computer and you're going 28 miles an hour,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
right? You're in a tailwind.
but you're also looking at visual signs, trees, flags, whatever it is, to get a sense for if you're in a tailwind. And I say you got to mentally prepare because now you do that turnaround, and now you're coming back and you go off that 28 or whatever it is, and now you're going 10 miles per hour, 12 miles, what 15. You're like, oh, I'm doing terrible. You may be doing fantastic,
Yep.
but you're just going against the headwind, as is everybody else. And so it is. There is a mental component that I think people sometimes just need to not look at their speed, especially when you're going into a headwind, because it's easy to get caught up in a negative aspect, a negative loop of saying, "Oh, I'm only doing this speed. I'm falling behind my pace." But instead, you're actually doing the best you can in that condition.
Yeah, I think Oceanside's the perfect example of this,
Yeah,
right? So the last 10 miles are always into a headwind.
that's a good point.
Tomorrow it'll be a headwind again,
Yeah. Hmm.
right? And so, I've raced Oceanside, I think 5 or 6 times, and I know now when I take that last right-hand turn onto the highway, it's going to be a headwind. And so now I look at it as like, man, this is an opportunity,
Yeah.
right? Instead of the first time I got there, I was like, holy smokes, this is so hard. I'm going so slow. Now I look at it, okay, I'm prepared for it, and it's an opportunity for me to use this knowledge that I have about staying small, staying arrow, not breaking arrow, and not worrying about how fast I get there, but just worrying about my effort.
Hmm.
And it's hard, right? Because I got 12 miles to go. I think it's 12 miles to go. I got 12 miles to go. I'll be there in like, based off of my pace right now, I'm going to be there in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. It's going to
Yeah.
be 40.
That's it.
And 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 not be discouraged by that, right? It is what it is because that means I was getting a tailwind somewhere else.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I remember you telling me that hey, Oceanside is always in the last 10, 12 miles, there's always going to be a headwind. And that actually helped me out because I
Yeah.
remember it was like that situation. You're coming down off some hills and you're just flying. And then you do make that turn and you're going over a bridge and what have you. And it's like, there's a lot of work all of a sudden. But I
Mhm.
remember you saying that, and that sort of, brought me to ease that, well, just stay on your pace in terms of what power you can do, not pace from a speed perspective.
Well, there's the mistake too that can happen when you get into the headwind is you feel that and then you overbike,
Hmm.
right? And then you put out too many watts because you feel
Yeah,
like, oh, I'm falling behind.
yeah,
And
true.
and then maybe you don't even hear yourself breathing anymore,
Yeah.
right? Because the wind is going by you.
Hmm.
And if you were to look down, you're like, oh my gosh, like my heart rate is elevated, my power's too high. And at Oceanside in particular, then you have to run like right away, right?
Yeah.
There's no real rest before you have to go. So I think that like knowing it ahead of time is actually really, really important. And obviously there's lots of apps you can look at of wind direction and so I think that that's the mental side of preparing yourself for it is also quite important.
No, I love it. I love it. No, so how about crosswinds?
Yeah, so crosswinds are really, really interesting because there's a few ways to ride crosswinds that I don't think people really know. And I got onto this. I was on some video a long time ago. It was a pro cycling guy who was teaching people how to ride in crosswinds, and I'm like, oh my God, I got to watch this.
Hmm.
And the thing that the pro cyclists do is they don't lean; they turn their wheel.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever heard this before,
Yeah,
but
counter turn.
counter steering, right?
Hmm.
And it really works.
Hmm.
And so one of the people that I coach from at Little Elm, I was telling her this, and I was explaining it to her, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, it worked so well. Everyone ahead of me was like leaned over to the point where they were almost falling over in these crosswinds." And she's like, "I just kept turning my wheel." And it's just physiologically easier on you and purportedly faster
Hmm.
to counter steer into the headwind or into the crosswind. Um, so what are your thoughts?
Well, tell me a little bit more about when people say when you use counter steer, people
Yep,
don't necessarily know what that is, but if you
yep.
watch, what was the car racing cartoon? Um,
Speed
oh,
Racer,
what was it?
Speed
Oh,
Racer.
that's it. I don't know, but anyways, there's
Okay.
this young car, and the old car is a cartoon, and the old car had to teach the younger car how to counter steer. In essence,
Mm,
turn in the opposite direction than you actually want to turn. It's a
yeah.
weird concept, but and cycling is an interesting physics problem when you are turning.
Yeah.
But when you say counter steer when there's a crosswind, describe a little bit more about that.
So it's literally just slightly turning your handlebar. So if you have a crosswind coming from your right,
Hmm.
so from your right to your left would be to turn your wheel just a little bit to the right.
Yeah.
And so in basically into the headwind.
Hmm.
And so because your bike when in the crosswind like that's going to naturally want to go left.
Yeah.
So you just turn your wheel, and once again, it's like maybe not even a degree. It's like just a
Hmm.
little bit more
Right.
pressure on that
Right.
side. It's
Hmm.
not really even turning, it's just more pressure on that
Yeah.
side, and it'll prevent you from being pushed to the left rather than once again leaning.
Yeah.
Because the natural tendency is to lean, and maybe a lean would actually work okay if it was a consistent, perfectly consistent wind.
Hmm.
But once again, you're going to go buy a building or something, and all of a sudden now you're not having that same consistent crosswind,
Hmm.
and you're leaned really far over. You're going to lose your balance.
Yeah.
And then once again, physiologically, when you lose your balance like that, you're having to actually use more muscular strength and more core strength and potentially more energy to hold yourself up.
Hmm. No, I love it. So an interesting sort of experiment people can try is on a area where there's no cars, in the parking lot, what have you. You can sit up and bike with no hands, okay, off your steering wheel, off your steering wheel. I'm thinking cars now, off your handlebars, and then take one hand and push on the handlebar as if you want to turn left. So I'm pushing with my right hand on the right side of the handlebars, and you won't go left.
Yeah.
You actually go to the right.
Yep.
It's the weirdest phenomena. So be careful when you do this because it's easy to mess up and fall. But what's
Maybe
interesting,
don't do it on your time trial bike.
well, whatever bike, it doesn't. Any
Yeah.
bike will work, but
Yeah.
but it is interesting how our brain figures out this counter stairs stuff. But if you try to sort of force the brain to say, "Oh, I want to go that way. I'm going to turn the other way." It's really, really difficult. But that's sort of a fun experiment to show the power of counter steer, and that's why I think what you're describing actually gives you a little bit more stability.
Yep.
Because you're pushing one way, but you're really trying to go the other way, and that's actually providing more of a balancing force.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, and then the other thing, just kind of circling it around, is also thinking about your front wheel and the depth.
Hmm.
So, same thing, like we knew before these athletes were going there that it was going to be really windy, and so we made a conscious decision to go with shallower front
Yeah.
wheels. And we still rode the disc wheel in the back, and but went with a really shallow wheel in the front,
Hmm.
and I think that paid off as well. And once again, you may or may not have different depth of front wheels, but if you do in a windy day, unless it's dead headwind, dead tailwind, which some courses are, right? They're just out and backs. Then the deep wheel would still work, but if you're gonna have crosswinds, the front wheel really does make a difference.
Yeah, because that's the wheel that's going to turn. The rear wheel is fixed to your frame, and it's not going to turn. It can provide a force like you would in a sailboat, which actually
Yep.
does actually help propel you forward. But the front wheel you've got to control.
Yep.
And if you get hit with a gust of wind and you're in aero, your
Yep.
ability to control that front wheel is challenged because of how deep the wheel may be. And so, no, you're spot on that. That having a shallow wheel is good. And then on another strategy, if the wind's that strong and you are going to be leaning the bike one way or the other, I always think of leaning the bike away from the wind, and that allows the wind to sort of blow off the wheel as opposed to pushing the bike into the wind. I know it's again one of these weird counterintuitive things, but that actually can give you a little bit more stability.
Yeah, and once again, I think all of these things you shouldn't just like, oh, race day, just do it,
Hmm.
right? Like practice these,
That's right.
practice these things not in a race
Mhm.
condition. Okay, John, let's quickly change to let's change to running in the wind.
Okay.
What are the physiologic implications of running into a headwind versus running with a tailwind?
Well, if you're running a headwind, drag force is a real force that you have to overcome during running. There's actually some good research on drag force during running and how close you need to be in front of somebody or it's going to be behind somebody to get a benefit. And for a typical win, you've got to be pretty close. So really on their shoulder type of thing. Well, but maybe a lot of people have seen the sub two attempt to break 2 hours in the marathon, and they used a formation of runners relative to the person who's actually trying to break a record. And that whole idea was to minimize the drag resistance force applied to the runner. And so it is a real force. It's typically not that big of a force, but if you're dealing with a strong headwind, tuck in behind somebody, you actually do get a benefit.
But John, and I know this is maybe I don't know. I'm assuming you teach this in one of your courses. Like, for example, a 10 mile an hour headwind versus a 10 mile an hour tailwind, physiologically on running economy and the amount of oxygen we use. What do you think? Like,
No,
what's
yeah, I actually don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it is a worsening of running economy, meaning you need to consume more oxygen to maintain the same pace.
yeah,
And that's why if you can draft off somebody,
yeah.
it's a benefit. And even on your course, you start looking for ways. Maybe there's no one around you, but you can try to figure out where you would get some shelter from the wind on a run,
Yeah.
whether it's close to a wall that you can run there, or get some type of break from that wind.
And why I was asking is because many triathletes they run to a pace,
Hmm.
right? So they're, hey, I'm going to run 9 minute miles for this 70.3.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And that's great when you start out with a tailwind and you're looking at your watch and you're like, okay, nine. And then
Hmm.
you turn into the headwind and now nines feel like eights.
Yeah.
Right. And that's another thing, like as far as advice I give athletes is like in a really windy day like that, your pace plan may not work out so well.
Hmm.
And it definitely you need to adjust for the tailwind and adjust for the headwind. Just like and I always, especially if people don't run a lot in the wind, I always tell them it's kind of like running up a hill and down a hill.
Yeah.
Like obviously as you go up the hill, you're not going to maintain the same pace. And as you go down the hill, you might be a little bit faster than your pace. And so you have to be like more listening to your body as far as physiologically how hard you're working, in particular into the headwind.
No, you're spot on with that. And then the other element to this is core temperature and
Yep.
keeping yourself cool.
Oh yes.
Because if you are running with a tailwind, you're going to have less air flowing over your body and less cooling effect.
I'm actually glad you said that because the one athlete I talked to after the race last weekend, they were saying how hot it was. And I'm
Mm,
like, whoa, it's like 30 mile an hour headwind. I'm like, yeah, yeah. When I was running with a tailwind,
yeah, yeah.
because it ended up being a pretty warm day and you didn't feel it until you ran with a tailwind.
Hmm.
And then you're almost like you feel like it's completely still.
Hmm.
And you're right, you can actually get the perception that you're actually getting really, really warm and core temperature will go up. Yeah.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
What other tips do you give people for running on a windy day?
I 100% agree with you on the drafting, right?
Hmm.
Like I tell people this, it's hard to find the right person to draft off of though in
Yeah,
a run. You know, if you think about it in a 70.3, how often are you just running side by side with the same pace
that's
person?
right.
Or, it's very, very rare for
Hmm.
you to be with somebody more than a mile even,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, now I do know people that do this. They just pace off of one person, right? They'll just get behind somebody. And so that's a maybe, but I'm just looking to me personally, like, it's very rare that I'm with the same person the entire
Right.
run. So it might be just for sections, right? Okay, I know I'm going to turn right into this headwind. Oh, there's a big person up there.
Hmm.
I'd rather have a big person, by the way,
Yeah,
than a small person.
yeah.
I might speed up coming into that corner, and maybe for the next mile, I'm going to tuck in behind them.
Mhm.
So at our race in Spain that we did in the fall, it was actually quite windy, and there was a section that was actually, I hate to say on the ocean, but it was on a pier,
Okay.
like a breakwater. And when you turned around, you knew you were going to get this long, almost a mile of headwind. And I really planned on it. Like
Mm.
I knew as soon as I turn, I'm going to get that. I'm starting to look for people like who can I get in behind? And number one reason, like maybe even if I go a little bit slower, physiologically, I'm getting myself a little bit of a more of a break.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, this is pretty advanced stuff. But I still think it can be very pertinent. And now the only other thing I'll tell you, John, is it can be very annoying for the person in front.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
But I'll tell you from a physics perspective, the person in front still gets a little bit of a break. Oddly,
exactly.
oddly
It,
enough.
yeah, and it's funny because if someone was drafting off me, I'd be actually okay with it until they clipped my heel,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and I wouldn't be so happy.
If they're in the same age group, probably not so happy, right?
Exactly. That's true. That's true. But no, I definitely I do that. The other thing is going back to the cooling, is once you especially turn into the headwind, that's when the water on you really does make a difference too,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
So you're not going to evaporate as much like when you have the tailwind, but when you get that headwind, if you can be really wet
Mhm.
when you turn into the headwind, it does help with the evaporative cooling.
No, and that goes right along with clothing and having the right clothing for whether it's a hot day or windy day, even tighter the clothing. Unfortunately, a lot of people wear the same type of kit for biking, and they're typically not changing. But yeah, get a cooling effect of moving air over you is much better when you pour water over you.
Yep. All right, I think we hit it.
Yeah,
Awesome. I think yeah, that's enough about wind, huh? Let's hope for no more windy
a
days.
lot of wind, a lot of hot air coming out here.
So I'm at work right now. And I'm about to ride my bike home. I commuted on my bike today, and I'm like hoping it's not a windy afternoon. I'm looking
Yeah.
outside. It
Yeah,
looks pretty
yeah,
nice.
yeah. Embrace the win. Well, hey, congrats also on your ride out to Death Valley,
Oh, thank
your
you.
annual ride. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
my eighth consecutive. John, we had five flat tires in a
Mm,
group of six people, and it kind of like put a bit of a downer on the day, to be completely honest with you. The highway was not very clean. It
no,
was
that's too
it was
bad.
it was just one section of the highway, unfortunately, that we had all our flats, and that was a little bit disappointing. But
Yeah.
other than that, wonderful. And then we did actually get to Death Valley. It was 105 degrees when we got there. The hottest March day ever.
Wow. Wow.
And I don't know if I've ever been so dehydrated when I got
Oh. No.
there. I think I may have lost 10 pounds.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, once again, I wasn't acclimatized, right? And all of a sudden,
Yeah,
like
yeah. There, yeah.
you do a 120-mile bike ride not
Yeah.
acclimatized in the heat.
Yeah.
So but thank you.
Well, that's impressive. Nice job. All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
hey, have a great weekend.
Okay. Talk soon. Bye bye.
All right. Talk soon.